Greetings all! Today, we are going to take a special look at the flying type and analyze its attributes, the Pokemon assigned to the type, and how it functions from a combative standpoint. The flying type is likely to be one of the first types that trainers will be introduced to on their journeys in the wild or through battle, and its defining characteristics are basic enough to make it one that merges with pretty much anything out there. In fact, it is the only type that is paired as a dual type with every single one of the remaining 17 types recognized, resulting in a tremendous pool of variety for trainers to choose from in using the type. It might not always offer superb benefits in offense or defense, but it is a type known for its speed, and its overall mobility and capacity to leave landlocked fighters in their dust can make it a useful type to get familiar with, if only for the sake of learning how to best it when confronted by it in battle and making it of use to oneself. The flying type itself is primarily defined by a single basic ability that all Pokemon assigned to the type possess: the ability to fly, to some degree or another. While the manner in which flight is enabled might differ depending upon the Pokemon being talked about, as some can fly through powered flight, while others simply glide or use energy-based abilities to fly through the air, their reliance on flight as their primary means of mobility grants them specific physical and combative characteristics that unify them and the powers that they can possess. Because flight is a very common feature among Pokemon, it makes the type one of the most prolific for a trainer to come across. And since it is flight that unifies these creatures, the way in which flying type offenses are delivered comes in two forms. First, there is the physical striking of opponents while in flight, utilizing the basic anatomy of beasts assigned to the type to strike with precise blows from moves like Wing Attack, Fly, and Drill Peck. On the other hand, especially for special attacks assigned to this type, flying type attacks can deliver damage through potent bursts of wind in a variety of different forms to deal damage, cutting or blowing away opponents fiercely in order to eliminate them, such as with moves like Air Cutter, Air Slash, and Hurricane. Both forms of offense can be potentially deadly in the right circumstances, even if they can generally be resisted with strong armor of any type. Since the flying type is defined by a very basic and widespread characteristic, the types of Pokemon that are defined under the type are large and incredibly varied. A large portion of these Pokemon, though, are birds, which itself is not that surprising given their general reliance on flight to get around. In addition to this though, this type is assigned to various flying arthropods, mammals, artificial life forms, and some even from beyond the boundaries of our known universe. All are still unified though by the use of their physical bodies or wind to deliver damage, and are skilled enough in this practice to make the most of these moves and grant them a same type attack bonus that testifies to their control of the air and winds around them. Outside of the flying type moves they specialize in, Pokemon assigned to the flying type are both limited and diverse in the moves that they can learn. As far as the type itself is concerned, because every single other type has been seen combined with its attributes, the type itself has access to an incredibly diverse array of moves that can help it dominate the battlefield. However, when it comes to the Pokemon themselves that are assigned to the type, they, on their own, are usually quite limited in the variety of moves they can learn, mostly only getting attacks related to whatever types they are assigned to. This is likely a consequence of the fact that the flying type is almost always a secondary type, with only the Noibat family having it as their primary type, and Tornadus being the only pure flying type Pokemon known to exist. As such, trainers that wish to make the most of Pokemon with this type will have to rely more on the natural stats and available strategies for each individual Pokemon, as the limited move variety in some cases can make them difficult to work with if they are at a type disadvantage. In terms of stat averages for the flying type, it generally falls below the average values for most stats across all of the types, which is reflective of the frail and generally uncombative nature of many of the Pokemon assigned to the type, in particular looking at birds and insectoids. The only two stats that are higher than average for the type are special attack and speed, and this is understandable given the natural attributes of Pokemon in possession of the type. Pokemon of this type usually can fly with exceptional agility and grace that is unseen among other types, allowing them to easily get the drop on their opponents and strike before they can even react. On the other hand, The high special attack stat assigned to the type is a consequence of their proficiency in using the wind itself as a projectile of some sort to deal damage, striking opponents from afar with great gusts of wind and razor-sharp blades of air, among other types of flying type special attacks. Even with this said though, it is noted that it is actually the attack stat of the type that serves as its second highest, a likely consequence of the basic physical strikes that most Pokemon assigned to the type prefer to use to defend themselves with. While they might not always be the most skilled of fighters in most areas, flying types can at least hit with decent force and easily outspeed others, as the flying type has the highest average base speed stat out of any type, and can definitely show it when used properly in battle. Currently, there are 101 recognized types of flying type Pokemon, one of them being a pure flying type and the remaining 100 of them being dual types. Additionally, 2 of the dual types are primary flying types, while the remaining 98 are secondary flying types. They are broken down into the following categories. Birds. These Pokemon are primarily defined by the fact that they are birds, and are thus assigned as flying types due to their need for flight to move around. They tend to be fairly limited in the types of moves they can naturally learn, and often rely on their other paired type to make the most of their powers in battle. Even so, some of the strongest possessors of the flying type dwell within this category, and their sheer numbers more than makes it likely that they will be found by most trainers even if they are doing little more than looking to the sky for an opponent. Arthropods. These Pokemon are either insectoid in nature, or are related to other arthropods like arachnids, as is the case for the members of the Gligar family. They are generally only classified as being associated with the flying type due to the presence of wings on their bodies that can enable powered flight, as they usually do not gain natural access to a lot of decent flying type moves to make offensive use of their type. This assignment is noted to be a bit tricky to work with in the case of Pokemon like Beedrill and Dustox, but their internal poisons do not respond well to shockwaves of any sort, even in the air or from upheavals of earth on the ground, and thus are not completely immune to the effects of certain types of ground type moves. Bats. These Pokemon are bats, and thus share many of the mammalian characteristics associated with normal bats, such as the use of echolocation for precise sight when moving through the air. These creatures are generally able to use their flying type attributes to at least some minor degree, but they are not always incredibly proficient at using them, limiting their capacity to make a much offensive use of their flying type attributes. They instead rely on their other assigned type to deal damage effectively, in particular specializing in speed and using their airborne agility to employ hit-and-run tactics to slowly whittle the energy of the opposition away. Aquatic organisms. These Pokemon are normally water-dwelling creatures, but they have the ability to actually fly through the air for long distances despite not having an anatomy completely built for such actions. While the members of the Mantike family are known to be able to glide as a result of their overall body shape, the origins of flight capabilities in Gyarados are unknown, and their assigned type is more due to an exceptional weakness to extreme cold, electricity, and forceful impacts from rocky material. Their access to offensive flying type attacks is fairly limited, leaving them with little more than the defensive attributes of the type to work with in most cases, though they can get access to devastating moves like Air Slash in the case of the former, and Hurricane in the case of the latter. Reptiles and Dragons. These Pokemon are primarily separated from others due to them either being reptiles or true dragons, all of which are further linked by their ability to readily wield dragon-type attacks naturally. While they generally do not all get access to really good flying-type moves until fairly late in their lives, these beasts are still among the strongest of the type, and are more than capable of sweeping away lesser life forms in battle if allowed. Fossil Pokemon. While these Pokemon are still defined as having the same basic flight capabilities as bird Pokemon, and fly in very much the same manner, they are classified separately from them because they are not birds in the case of Aerodactyl, or belong to an ancient lineage unrelated to modern birds in the case of the Archon family. These once extinct creatures have been brought back from the ancient times they originally dwelled within, and would not be possible to see and obtain without the miraculous technology that successfully brought them back to life. They are able to use a wider variety of attacking types than most other flying-type Pokemon, and are among the fastest and most offensively powerful beasts of the type, but they are held back somewhat by their weak defenses, though their sometimes vicious and downright cruel behavior can more than make up for this in battle. Fairy types. These Pokemon are separated from other flying types because they are the only fairy types with a natural capacity to truly fly. Instead of relying on attacks and techniques exclusively to help them survive in the wild, these creatures work better at keeping other creatures alive with their advanced array of tactical moves, being better suited for a supporting position than a true offensive threat, even though their natural abilities, and the moves that Togekiss in particular get access to, can still make them a threat in the right circumstances. They are fairly rare as a result of their unusual lifestyles and physical attributes, but are otherwise decently powerful in the battlefield, though trainers will have to spend some time working with them to make the most of their unusual type assignment and moveset. Plants. These Pokemon are primarily defined by the fact that they are actually plants that have developed the ability to fly in order to help spread their seeds or pollen across long distances. These creatures are able to use their flying type attributes decently well offensively for the most part, even if they don't gain access to a large number of flying type attacks, with Pokemon like Tropius being more about bulk and brute strength, while the members of the Hoppip family are more along the lines of tactical fighters at best. Shaman are the only ones in this category that are only a flying type while in a specific form, namely their Sky form, so they can disperse their seeds across the world, and they can definitely strike with surprising power, agility, and fierceness, even if this transformation does come at a cost in their overall defenses. Automatons and spiritual organisms. These Pokemon are differentiated by the fact that they are either spiritual entities, as is the case with the members of the Drifloon family and Rotom in its fan form, or are of artificial design, as is the case with Sigilyph. While the former are unable to utilize their flying type nature offensively for the most part, being limited to only a few moves of their type, Sigilyph stand out as being surprisingly versatile in the different types of flying type moves they can learn, which makes sense since they are masters of aerokinesis. Drifloon and Drifblim, on the other hand, are only flying types as a result of their chosen physical form and learn little in the way of effective flying type moves, and Rotom only gain access to the Air Slash attack as a consequence of possessing a special type of fan when taking on their specific form. Rodents. This special category is reserved for Emolga, as while they are mammals like Zubat and Woobat, they are separated as their own biological group as they do not truly have the capacity to fly, instead relying on their electrical powers and the skin membranes between their limbs to glide through the air. They are decent fighters and can move around in the air with impressive agility, but like many rodent Pokemon, their offensive and defensive stats are not incredibly high, so they have a limited capacity to effectively use their acrobatics attack, which is the only flying type move they learn naturally. Subspace Dweller. This special category is reserved for Minior, abnormal life forms that occupy the uppermost reaches of the Earth's atmosphere, though still ultimately being of terrestrial origin. These creatures are generally defined by the rocky outer shell that protects their core, but what makes them partial flying types is the constant stream of particles that are emitted from the cracks in their shell, which have the unusual property of altering nearby air currents, generating a small gust of wind around them that allows them to levitate off of the ground when not in orbit, granting them the offensive and defensive attributes of the type. It is uncertain how they are able to do this, but it at least allows them to make use of their type assignment in a combat situation, protected or not. Forces of Nature. This special category is reserved for the legendary trio of Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus. These creatures are linked to each other in lore and in their incredible offensive powers, and while Landorus is unable to make much offensive use of its flying type nature on its own, all three are still incredibly powerful beasts, with Tornadus in particular, the only pure flying type Pokemon currently recognized, being able to bring down entire cities with their devastating hurricane attack. Their wide move pool grants them a degree of versatility that is unseen among many other flying types, and overall sets them up to be incredibly powerful and dangerous opponents to have to face in any battle. Ultra Beast. This special category is reserved for Celesteela, one of the extra universal entities known as the Ultra Beasts. This particular creature has the ability to fly and use flying type attacks as a result of the flammable gas that it stores in its arms, which can be ignited by its two arms to blast them off with the same force and velocity as a rocket. This serves as their primary means of locomotion, as the rest of their body is unable to move much on its own, and they can generate enough thrust to actually launch themselves into space if they so wish to. This power might only naturally transition into a capacity to use the air slash attack, but it is nonetheless enough to grant them the expected defensive attributes of the flying type and are assigned as such. In looking at the flying type's advantages and disadvantages in battle, in terms of offense, the flying type has 3 advantages, 3 disadvantages, and no immunities. The type is at an advantage against bug types, because while most bug types have a sturdy exoskeleton that is designed to withstand many forms of direct attack, flying type moves can generate a concussive force through direct contact or with wind that can potentially rip these shells apart. This makes sense biologically, as many flying types are birds and have developed their offensive flying type attributes in part to bypass the exoskeletons of bug types so they can feast on their soft, edible insides. The type is also at an advantage against grass types, for like the bug type, their soft bodies do not have much in the way of external protection against the concussive forces of flying type attacks and are thus easily damaged by them. The type is further at an advantage against fighting types, as while these creatures are normally able to deal effective damage against many types of opponents, they are thrown off guard by flying type attacks as they are psychologically grounded on the solid earth for the most part, and have a hard time using their bodies to resist attacks if all they are trying to counterattack or strike is air. The type is at a disadvantage against rock types because, much as with the normal type, the flying type's reliance on direct contact or wind does little to penetrate the rocky armor possessed by rock type Pokemon, and is thus unable to always readily overcome them as a damage buffer. The type is also at a disadvantage against steel types because, just as with rock types, the moves that are defined with the attributes of the flying type are unable to easily bypass the metallic armor possessed by steel types. The type is further at a disadvantage against electric types because most electric type Pokemon are able to generate electrical bursts from their bodies that can act as a damage buffer against certain types of attacks. In this case, any move that involves the use of direct contact through flight or wind-based power can be abated or disrupted by an electrical discharge, severely weakening the moves in the process. Defensively speaking, the flying type has 3 resistances, 3 weaknesses, and 1 immunity. The flying type is resistant against the bug type because these creatures often have an established predatory relationship with bug type Pokemon and are biologically designed to be resistant against their assaults. Not just from a damage perspective, but from a psychological one as well, as most bug types are afraid to use their natural assets to attack when they know they are putting themselves in the way of a potential predator. The flying type is also resistant against the grass type for similar reasons, with them having a developed biological resistance against the energy absorbing and overall powers of grass types from both an offensive standpoint and a psychological one. The flying type is further resistant against the fighting type for not only psychological reasons, with most fighting types having an issue with attacking something not on the ground where they can easily handle them, but also for true defensive ones, as many flying types have the ability to generate gusts of air in some fashion that act as a physical damage buffer against fighting type assaults, leading fighting type moves to strike air before the target to disperse some of their energy and weaken their overall impact. The flying type is weak against the rock type because, while the bodies of many flying types might be able to sustain damage from most types of physical strikes, the sheer amount of blunt force trauma involved in many rock type moves, along with the abnormal energy fields emitted by the few rock type special attacks known, is enough to break their otherwise frail or fragile bodies, smashing bones and muscles and making it difficult for flying types to protect themselves against their impact. The flying type is also weak against the electric type because most flying types need their flying appendages to function in order to fly and move around. Concentrated bursts of electricity have the effect of disrupting their muscle movements and potentially paralyzing them, which, if it happens, can cause them to drop out of the sky and be rendered incapable of readily fighting anymore, further potentially dealing damage to their muscle and nervous systems that can render them completely incapacitated. The flying type is further weak against the ice type for similar reasons as to the electric type. Flying type Pokemon usually need their flying appendages to be mobile for them to attack and move around, and freezing them can not only slow them down by lowering their high body temperatures or completely incapacitating them, but can cause ice to form on their appendages, making them too heavy to fly and rendering them incapable of readily defending themselves. The flying type has 1 major immunity, and it is to the ground type. This makes sense considering that many ground type attacks rely on seismic waves to deal damage, and therefore would have little to no effect on Pokemon that naturally spend much of their time above the surface of the ground. The extreme maneuverability of these Pokemon in the air also serves to enable them to readily dodge incoming ground-type attacks that involve alternate ways of dealing damage, making it nearly impossible to strike them regardless of how accurate the user of a ground-type move may be. As far as using the flying type in battle goes, it is definitely one that most trainers will have to get accustomed to on their journeys as a result of its common occurrence. But at the same time, it is rarely a type that can be used for pure offense, as it is built to be more of a tactical type. This is reflected in the fact that the most useful of flying type moves tend to have powerful secondary effects that serve a greater purpose outside of damage, such as Air Slash and Hurricane, while moves like Tailwind are perfect for setting up a trainer's team. On that same note, a lot of the Pokemon assigned to this type have high speed stats and can maneuver around other Pokemon fairly easily, making way for tactical strategies rather than the brute force or strong defenses possessed by only a few handfuls of Pokemon assigned to the type. Moreover, their limited access to a wide diversity of moves in many cases forces them to use what offenses they do have to take down opponents with specific strategies that may require unique setups to work. Thankfully, Flying-type Pokemon are generally quite easy to train and can make good partners for novice and veteran trainers alike, and some of their strongest members can prove to be devastating combatants that can use their agility to swiftly take down anything that gets in their way with little effort. It might not be as offensively gifted as some other types, but the flying type is still a good one for trainers to try out at an early stage of their journey and learn the ropes with, as it is definitely one that possesses a tactical edge to it that few other types can readily match in battle. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description. With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.